Hello, welcome to the Game Developers Library, the almost monthly podcast about books that game developers should read or perhaps shouldn't. We're just kind of working our way through a selection of books, some of which are the obvious choices for books about game design and development, and some are perhaps tangential and less obvious. I'm Joe Baxter-Webb from Indie Game Clinic, and I am joined by Tom, my regular co-host. Hi, Tom.
G'day, mate.
He's from Australia, if you hadn't noticed.
I keep reminding people.
What have we been reading this month, Tom?
We have been reading a book called Up, Down, Up. I can't remember what the subtitle is.
Yes, well, it's interesting because the subtitle is Why Some Game Companies Succeed While Others Fail. But I did find out there was an original subtitle, perhaps less sensationalist. The Journey of a Successful Gaming Company was the old subtitle. So I think this is like when I changed my YouTube video titles, like hoping that making the slightly more emotive one will make more people read. But yeah.
Yeah, I do think the one he ended up on is a better subtitle. So
yes.
I think we shouldn't shy away from failure in this industry.
Yeah, well, it starts off, we won't go too far ahead, but in the intro, it's kind of like all companies fail eventually, right? It's like a life cycle, not even a cycle, but a lifespan. What made you choose this book? Because my understanding, you were kind of reading it anyway before we picked it for the podcast.
Yeah, well, I was listening to it and, cards on the table. It's because I had an Audible credit, and that came up in my recommendations after all the Jason Schreier ones that we've read. But it is, a topic that I'm interested in, and, I've got aspirations of, wanting to start a studio one day, and as far as I can tell, there's not an awful lot of books on that particular niche. It was a very interesting concept to me.
Yeah, and it seems to be a self-published book as well, which I found interesting because I think it kind of illustrates how niche a book like this is. I mean, I've been looking around for potential publishers for the design book that I'm halfway through writing, and it's like, when you do anything that's this specific, it's kind of, you can go to an academic press, and then if you go to a pub, like a sort of normal public populist press, their idea of what non-fiction is like still narrative non-fiction, they're not interested in this kind of stuff. So I can kind of see why he might have chosen to just put this out on Amazon, because the amount of us that, I mean, there's so many people out there starting companies now that don't read a book about it before they start. Right?
How hard can it be?
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of the appropriate person to write this book, I had a look at Nordstrom's background. He has 20 years of industry experience. And I think the thing that makes him quite such an interesting person is it's from all over the place. Yeah. It's not like, this isn't someone that's just worked in free to play or just worked in big AAA games or just done indie, done like all of those. Like, I would consider that to be linked to be like the triangle of the games industry, right? There's obviously other places you can be in, but in terms of like the different ways of working and business models and stuff, that's like as far apart as you can get. So he's currently the CEO at PlayerUnknown. Before that, 5 years at Paradox. So you're the company that make all of the big grand strategy games. He was the innovation SVP, then the head of studio before that, then after that the head of studio, and then after that the chief strategy officer. And then before that he was at King for 4 years, was the general manager at the Malmo studio of King, so King who make Candy Crush, and 10 years of industry experience before that, which started off with like founding indie companies and stuff like that. So really lots and lots of different experience going into this. And then the book itself is based on, you've got this big list up the front, which is dozens and dozens of people that were interviewed for the book. So you've got Warren Spector from Other Side, you've got Tanya Short from Kit Fox, lots and lots of names from the free-to-play space, like King and Supercell and Rovio and stuff like that.
I did have a question for you about the physical book, because I listened to the audio version. They actually had like the interviews with those people as part
interesting.
Of that. Yeah, I was wondering if that was actually...
No, well, they're quoted, but they've actually inserted the quotes into
like sort of, long sections of them just sort of talking about the topic.
Yeah. That's an interesting little value add. I've never had that with an audiobook, but I guess that's the sort of fun thing you can do when you self-publish, because you can go, this is the best format for this, screw you, which is good. It's filled with all these little anecdotes that kind of illustrate a point, and I'm not gonna I haven't noted down loads and loads of quotations. I've just tried to pick out some that I found personally interesting, because it kind of steps through and explains these particular things you need to pay attention to if you want to run a game company, if you're already running a game company, and then it will draw examples from different companies and how they approach stuff. And there's just so many in here. It's very, very dense with these kind of case studies and examples that we can't really go through them all, but it really is quite broad. And I would say there's not loads and loads of representation of very small indie companies. But a lot of the companies in here were that when they started.
Yeah.
So like Rovio was a work-for-hire studio that made like 50 games before it made Angry Birds, I think, of like its own attempts at kind of making its own games. Supercell, these all start as indie companies at some point before they become like big publicly traded.
Yeah, like, because it sort of comes down to, like, you know, that sort of mushy definition of what an indie is. Like, you know, are all startups indie by definition, or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of that comes down to aspiration, which a lot of the early part of the book is about. So we will tend to focus on that stuff a little bit, because I think that's what the audience for this podcast want. We tend to have a lot of people listening who are, you know, in the early stages of doing this kind of stuff. So that is really the focus of this book is on, it's really written for an audience of people who want to start a studio rather than make one game, right?
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to go into the book understanding. It's like, this is a book about running a games business, and that isn't just making a game and releasing it, right? It's not like...
Yeah, and I think a lot of, you know, people, when they're making their first indie game, sort of laser focus on making this game, and then once it's out, then I'll worry about making the company, whereas this is kind of the other way around.
Yeah, and I mean, in the indie space, people do that and have successful careers doing that, right? Team Cherry make a game, make a sequel to the game that is kind of... I don't know how similar it is to the original Hollow Knight. Probably never going to get around to playing it. But it, you know, that in the eyes of this book, that would be maybe considered a failure.
Yeah.
But we'll get onto that later, because I think that's one of the possible criticisms of this book. But the introduction section talks about how all companies fail eventually, and there are these 4 stages that most people will be familiar with already. You've got a company that's a startup, you've got a company that's in growth mode, you've got a company that is mature, and then you've got a company that's in decline. And the book comes back to these stages multiple times and kind of describes them and talks about how you get into them, how you leave them and go into the next stage. And there's quite a few chapters where we come back to these in more detail. I'm probably not going to focus a lot on these in discussion, because, again, for the audience of this podcast, stuff like managing a studio of 500 people that is going from maturity into decline isn't super relevant. But there is a lot of talk about how once you're into one of these stages, you can go backwards.
Yeah.
But it takes a very conscious strategy. So they use King as an example of a studio that went into decline and then pulled itself back from that by like deliberately focusing on doing a particular thing, which was like, stop making new games, just focus on like the quality of these existing ones, all of that kind of stuff. So it's like it is presented as an aging process, and you can kind of de-age a studio, but you have to really be very conscious of what the problem is and address it very, very directly, and not just kind of fingers crossed and hope it will get better. There's a lot of, I would say about the last quarter of the book is about that, which we probably won't focus on now because it's not the exciting part that we will care about. Yeah,
if you ever get to the point where you've got a 500 employee studio that's in decline, then, tell us how you got there. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, then we need to be learning from you, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Did you have any? The first couple of chapters are about company culture and company principles. Did you have any notes on those areas or anything that jumped out that you wanted to speak about?
I'd like to talk about company culture because, like, a lot of that early stuff, we sort of mentioned before about, when you're starting off making an indie game, you're sort of thinking about the game and, getting the product out. Whereas, I don't think people often think a lot about, the working with other people part and, trying to create, like, a team that can, get to the point where you launch the product in, like, the best way possible.
Yeah. And there's some stuff in this this first chapter about it's kind of prefaced culture as the foundation of a successful company. He gives a quote from Frederick Wester from Paradox, who says, "I'm not interested in what any other company does. I want everyone to follow the behaviors we need to achieve our goals." So you decide what your company is for.
Yep.
And kind of what you're saying, a lot of people, when they start making something, their only real goal is to ship a thing and hopefully it sells something. And I would say one of the primary arguments throughout this book is that is not where success comes from. Success comes from trying to be the best at a very specific thing.
Yeah.
And that means instead of just saying, I'm going to ship my game and hopefully sell 100 copies, you say, I'm going to create this game that is the best Worms clone we've had in the last 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And then and then the kind of financial success and all of the metrics just follow that as a natural symptom of doing the right thing in the first place, kind of thing. And the other thing, that Wester quote really reminded me of something we were talking about in the last episode when we were reading Blood, Sweat and Pixels with Yacht Club Games, who made Shovel Knight.
Yeah.
We were talking about how they had this quite unusual studio structure where it's like 5 people that all make the decisions together, like Radiohead.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole point of doing something on your own, is so that you get to define all of these rules about how it works. Did you have any other thoughts on that kind of
Like, I had that
aspect of working with other people and culture and stuff?
Yeah, I had that exact same thought about Yacht Club, because again, they sort of, had a very strong principle that they set out to build a, game that felt like it sort of belonged to Nintendo.
Yeah.
And, they have this unique sort of horizontal structure, but because they've got this very clear set of principles in place, and, I think they all worked for like the same sort of work for hire studio.
Yeah.
And, they're friends, but, they actually work together. So they sort of, it's not like deciding to build a game with, some friends fresh out of high school and like none of you really know what you're doing. They're sort of professionals that had built stuff together before. I think that allows you to sort of, take a lot of shortcuts with communication where,
Yeah.
and I think that's the sort of value in, having a strong company culture that's like written out and specified, is it makes communication more efficient because you don't have to like, spell everything out. Like there's a lodestar that everyone can sort of point to in all of their decision making.
Yeah. And I think, anyone who's listening that has been doing like global networked teamwork from home stuff in the last few years will probably feel the pain of what happens when this is not happening, right? Where you've got all of these, you've got like a team distributed across the world and people from different cultures and not really a very coherent company culture sometimes. I've definitely been in situations like that. But yeah, I mean, Yacht Club and Shovel Knight, not actually in this book, but the benefit of doing the podcast in the way that we do means we can kind of create these points of comparison. So there was a quote here from someone from Supercell who said that their company culture, the goal of their company culture was to try and create a sense of psychological safety for the workers, which is exactly what you're talking about, of like certain things can go unsaid because everyone already agrees on them and everyone knows that everyone already agrees on them. So you can sort of skip that bit and just get on to being productive. And there's also this piece of research that was done at Google, which was to do with, they basically found out that the most high-performing teams were ones where everyone spoke an equal amount.
Yeah.
And then the worst-performing teams had one person dominating the conversation, and that highlighted the benefit of having like an average social sensitivity.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, no, go on.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of another book, which we should probably do at some point, called Creativity Inc., which is about the founding of Pixar. And they had a chapter on there about like their actual like meeting room, where the original meeting room was like a long rectangle, and they found that ended up having like, these lopsided conversations just because, the people at the heads of the table tended to speak more, and they replaced it with a round table and started getting like much better results because of it.
Yeah, that's really funny, isn't it? We're such simple creatures. I mean, I think you can go a bit far with this stuff because sometimes there are people who are just quiet.
Yeah.
But it's very hard. It's often worth encouraging people to speak up when they don't want to, because it's very difficult to tell the difference between someone who's being quiet because they don't care about the thing, which is kind of a problem in its own right, or quiet because they don't have anything to say, or quiet because they're sort of sullen and passive aggressive and they do disagree with what's going on, but they're not saying anything, So, really, really difficult thing to try and get right. We've also got a chapter on principles, and this is about kind of what you were saying about the moment of like spelling it out somewhere so that it's just explicit. So, good principles are well explained, and they're not just sound bites of like, we care about this. It's like, well, how do we care about this? What do we do to ensure we care about this? All of that kind of stuff. They give an example of Blizzard's focus on quality. Blizzard have just always been like, we're not shipping anything until we're 100% happy with it. They also give the example of the beer fridge at King, and like how the fridge and what happens around the beer fridge is like a thermometer of whether they've built good trust within the company, because they don't have to lock it or anything like that. And then the thing that I thought was interesting here, which kind of coming back to that idea of like not just trying to build a game, but like create a company that is the best at doing a particular thing. One of the points that they make here is principles shouldn't be universal. If it's something everyone in the world would agree to, then it's not really a personal or company principle. So principles should by definition repel some people and attract other people, and like the whole point is the CEO says these are the principles of the company, and if you like these principles, work here, and if you don't like these principles, don't work here. Basically.
You don't need a principle say everyone needs to wear trousers.
Yeah, exactly. Like a common thread. There's the next chapter is actually titled this, but it's a common thread all the way through, is all successful game companies have high ambitions.
Yep.
So again, it's that idea of you're trying to be the best at a specific thing. They give an example of CCP, who made EVE Online.
Yep.
Can you remember what their lofty ambition is? It's quite interestingly worded.
Something to do with like being a social game.
It is that basically, It's that their ambition is to create virtual worlds that are more meaningful than real life, and they give a really good example of this, of just like people become friends playing EVE Online, and they do that despite the fact that it is the most harsh, cutthroat environment that you could have in a game.
Yeah.
And I literally just now saw a similar argument made about Dark Souls, and why that is the value in Dark Souls of not having the difficulty settings. Because when you have the social element of seeing the messages that other people have left you in Dark Souls, you've got like this camaraderie of knowing that everyone is suffering through the same really difficult game.
Yeah, when you see a big pile of them stacked on top of each other, you know you're in trouble. Yeah,
because it's very interesting, because I've never played EVE Online, but you can, from the outside, it can be seen as this very sort of cold, masculine, mathy type game. But just the idea that you can create something that is very socially meaningful for people by creating such a harsh environment is an interesting one.
I've never played it either, but it's like every 9 months or so you'll see like a article come out on Polygon of some amazing emergent story that came out where one side destroyed like a $7 million ship. They have $7 million ships in the game, and somebody that's infiltrated some other organization, and it's a very sort of like role play, but almost in like a Model UN kind of way. Yeah. And it's like, how can a $7 million ship even exist? And then it makes you realize that all of the NFT guys, they basically just wanted to play EVE Online without doing the gameplay. Yeah.
which doesn't work. You get the value from the use, right?
Yeah, just play EVE Online.
But there's this kind of example is interesting to me because it's the idea of, like, the company has this quite lofty goal and the game is just a way of achieving that. And in this chapter about aspirations, Nordstrom goes on to say that founders of companies tend to have a chip on their shoulder. They're people with a chip on their shoulder, and that is something that sort of fuels them to do this kind of unique aspirational thing. And you have to have some sort of ambition in the world above just releasing a game and making enough money, because that's the ambition that most of us have. But that's like a small town ambition, right? That's like what you care about in your context of, like, who you know in the real world or who you hang around with in a forum online. It's not the ambition that's actually going to drive you to making, like, something that is internationally recognized and bought by, like, hundreds of thousands of people, you know?
Yeah, and sort of going back to that idea of, you know, writing out principles sort of turns them into a lodestar. When you're, like, doing anything in your game or in your company, you can, like, refer back to that and say, is the thing that I'm doing in aid of that? If it's not, then you probably need to change course. Yeah,
exactly. The next chapter follows on from that bit, and I've got loads and loads of notes here that aren't actually from the book because it's just sent me off in a million directions. But we've got the hedgehog concept next, which is this chapter is only 5 pages long, and I have the most notes on it. So the hedgehog concept is Nordstrom applying an idea from Jim Collins, who is like a broader business theorist, not specific to games. And Jim Collins starts with a story by Isaiah Berlin about foxes and hedgehogs. And the distinction between a fox and a hedgehog is a fox knows lots of things, but a hedgehog knows one big thing. A hedgehog knows one really important thing, which is basically just, how do I not get eaten by a fox? So the hedgehog concept is, can you remember what the 3 things are that you're supposed to think of?
I can't remember the 3 things.
So the first one is what drives your economic engine? So what can you sell? And in many ways, we've all got that solved for us anyway, because there is actually an audience for any single genre of game if you execute it well, and there's more than one platform you can sell games on. So we sort of have that side sorted. And then the other 2 things are, what are you passionate about and what are you uniquely suited to be the best in the world at? Which sounds quite daunting, but I've got some points on that in a minute. But yeah, I found this section really, really interesting because here we have a person who has been in these managerial roles in so many companies that have done very well, and he's kind of quoting other games leaders and he's quoting business leaders like Jim Collins, and everything he's saying and everything they're saying collectively goes completely against all of the game dev meta bullshit that you see on Reddit and game dev YouTube, which is always about, like, trying to read the tea leaves, cargo cult mentality. Oh, what genre does well? Like, look at like data on Steam and go, oh, lots of these sold, so I should make that. And all of these guys who are way more successful than any of us or any of the people having that debate in that space are saying the exact opposite. It's like, no, make something you're passionate about because that's how you'll make something good. And also make the thing that you're equipped to do the best. And the thing that jumped to my mind is recently I was listening to Designer Notes, and they had an episode with Zach Barth from Zachtronics, and he was basically saying that the worst game they put out, or one that he considered the worst, was Ironclad Tactics, which was like their card-driven mech game.
That's right, yeah.
And the game that is broadly considered the most successful Zachtronics is Opus Magnum. And that game is like the most distilled formulaic version of what they do, and the game that didn't do so well was them deviating and trying to do something else. And there's nothing wrong with trying to do something else, right? And in many ways, if you do the thing that's more likely to make you successful first, then you can kind of build up a nest egg to do whatever the hell you want later on, because you've had like a couple of successful games doing something that you know you can succeed at. And then if you want to make a claymation about depression later on, you can do whatever the hell you want, right? This is why, David Lynch could go off and make house music in his shed or whatever. Like, no one wants to listen to David Lynch's house music, but he can do what he wants at a certain stage. But this whole thing of the hedgehog concept, it reminds me of the Zachtronics story. It reminds me of stuff we've talked about on the podcast before with like people like Lucas Pope, Ed McMillan, where they're like breakout successes. You can look at their previous things in their career and it's like a distillation of the things they're already good at, rather than them just like veering off in a weird direction. So yeah, the actionable takeaway here is really, really clear. It's like, okay, at some point you need to take stock and be like, hey, I'm good at A, B, and C, and I'm awful at X, Y, and Z, and probably make something that is A, B, C, and also, you know, something that hasn't been around for a little while, or something like catering. People talk about gaps in the market.
Yeah.
And the thing here is, yes, look for a gap in the market, but also look for a gap in the market that you can actually execute well. Because like I could say, oh, there's a gap in the market for like a, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like the worst game that I'm the least suited to making, like a hero shooter, erotic hero shooter.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely a gap in the market for that, but I don't have the skill set to build an erotic hero shooter.
I guess it depends on how you feel about Marvel Rivals.
Yeah, if you've got the mods.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the thing that it reminded me the most of is my favourite GDC talk, which is called Failing to Fail by Jeff Vogel of Spiderweb Software.
I have exactly the same
really?
thing noted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just watched that by accident. It didn't have anything to do with this podcast. Go on, tell me, what did you have notes-wise on that?
Well, that's just the thing that immediately leaped to my mind when he was talking about the hedgehog principle, where, you know, it's this small studio, and like the subject of the talk is how he's managed to survive for several decades.
So Jeff Vogel makes games like it's a Vernum, isn't it? Like these Ultima style top-down 1990s RPGs that still look like 1990s RPGs.
Yeah, CPRPGs that but you know, he built his own engine. Each game sort of like built on top of what the previous game did. So he's, you know, the best in the world at doing that.
Yeah.
And, you know, has a core built-in niche audience. But yeah, if you think about like what he's done as, you know, an indie developer trying to like start out, I find a lot of the time, like as you're developing something, you get other ideas for other types of games. And the more different that is from the idea that you're currently working on, the more work you're kind of throwing away. So if you're like constantly building on top of what you've done in the past, then, you know, hopefully that's going to get better and better over time. Another like studio I think of is Supergiant, where, you know, they did have like a breakout success with like Bastion, but, you know, I think if they hadn't then built like, you know, Pyre and then Hades on top of that, like, you know, people probably might have forgotten about Bastion instead of everyone being very excited about Hades too.
I mean, there are lots of younger developers who have never played Bastion, or they've only heard about it because they've followed stuff about Hades afterwards. So Hades to them seems like an overnight success. But yeah, the Jeff Vogel example is a very good one. He talks about 25 minutes into that video, he talks about how, and this is, for me, this is the bit that highlights you can be the best in the world at something if you pick the right thing. He talks about how every year there is a new genre of games which is underutilized. Right, so instead of doing the cargo cult mentality thing of going, these are popular right now, run over there, it's kind of like the when they zig, we zag mentality of you go, oh, there hasn't been a good tower defense in a couple of years. It only has to be a couple of years because people's love for particular types of gameplay doesn't go away no matter what people say. It just gets over or underserved at particular points in time. And you will hear people online, I see this all the time, where they complain about how there's too much of something. And those are always people you can disregard, because what they're expressing isn't that they used to like this thing and they've got fatigue of it. They're just telling you they never liked it. You know, people that go, oh, there's too many bullet heavens, there's too many platformers. They're just people that don't like that type of game, and they're expressing it as like I'm overwhelmed with how many of these things there are. But they're not going to play any of them anyway, and they never were.
No, and like I think people can also get confused by that. Like when you do have a big success, like, you know, take Vampire Survivors, and then there's like a 9-month to 12-month gap, and then the market's kind of flooded with, you know, imitators, and then at that moment it feels like, oh, there's too many of these out. But you know, those are the, you know, people chasing the gold rush. Whereas you know, it's the breakout success from, you know, 5 years before that. That's, you know, where the the right genres that, people going, well, I really enjoyed that game 5 years ago. I'd really like some more like that.
They end up being good designs because it's people being driven by gameplay that they want to see rather than copying something in the market because they think that's going to be successful. Hi, Joe here, just punching in the middle of the show to let you know about our Patreon. If you like this podcast and you would like it to continue, please support us on the Indie Game Clinic Patreon. That is patreon.com/Indie Game Clinic. Supporting at the lowest tier gets you access to the Indie Game Clinic Discord, which is a closed Discord and support group for indie game developers. We have a bit more of a focus on game design than a lot of developer-specific communities online, and we have quite a kind of solid culture of mutual playtesting and stuff like that. I do regular streams where I playtest our members' games and all of that kind of good stuff. So yeah, support the Patreon if you find this podcast helpful and you want it to keep going. And thank you to all of you who already do that. Back to the show. Because if you do something that you're not really passionate about and you're doing it because you think that's a surefire way to success, you're probably going to make mistakes that you don't know about. And I've said this to people before when they've sent me Vampire Survivors games to review or do design crit on, is that some of the recurrent issues you see in those clones could be solved by just going on the Vampire Survivors Reddit and reading it for 45 minutes. Yeah. Like, that is the bare minimum. If you're entering into a genre that you don't actually play, the bare minimum research you can do is just go and find some discussions about it and read them. And people don't do that. People think they can just like glance at a game and go, oh, that looks like a simple feature set, I can copy that. And that's just not how you make something good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there are 18,000 games being added to Steam every year, 50 a day. Those numbers are really overwhelming, but that's still like the population of a small town. And I think if you could go into your town and just meet random people, and there would be people who are the best at something, but someone who gives the best massage, someone who tells the best stories about the war, whatever. Everyone is equipped to be the best at something. It's just, I think the thing about the hedgehog concept that really requires a lot of maturity is that the thing you should do in this instance, the thing you're passionate about, the thing that you are, uniquely skilled at, and the thing that could make some money is not necessarily the thing you want to do, right? It's like, I would love to make a Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 style CRPGs, but I can't make them on my own, and I can't write, and there's various skills that I don't have. So if it's starting to think this way could actually be quite freeing, because you throw away all of these ideas for things that you just aren't actually capable of doing, and you say, right, we're going into business mode now, not hobbyist tinkering around mode, and that means that I can start to cast aside certain ideas or put them in the fridge for later because I just know that I can't execute those things.
Yeah, which, that might be a good sort of segue to, this was in the startup phase, but basically talking about, how are you going to pay for it? And, sort of talking about bootstrapping versus, raising capital and the pros and cons of each of those, which I think for, probably this audience, bootstrapping seems like the, most attractive option initially because, you get complete control and get to reap, well, most of the rewards from it. Like, whichever platforms you sort of post that on will take their cut and you can pay tax and all that other stuff. But, yeah. Did you have any thoughts on?
I didn't know. I mean, not from the book exactly, but I think there are, endless conversations that you can have about publishers and indie publishers and what value do they provide. And I think the ones that seem to actually provide value are the ones that are incredibly specific to a niche, and they gather around creators that do a specific type of thing and they put them together in the same way that a record label might. So, again, not mentioned in the book, but a good example of an indie publisher that is doing incredibly niche work is someone like Critical Reflex that sort of did mouthwashing. I played their game Karimara the other day. That is this really cool, spooky little, very short, hour-long puzzle game. And you see the credits roll, and there are development credits that are like someone from the team from mouthwashing, where it's like, okay, they've needed some help, and the community that's formed around that publisher is so there are like other reasons why someone that is in a really small company might want to think about reaching outside and not just bootstrapping because of these other things that can happen like organically from being part of a group. But that's kind of very much aside from what the book is kind of talking about here. It's the classic, in the book it's presented as the classic kind of trade-off of like, do you maintain full control over what you're doing versus do you sell it? And I think the other thing we have to factor in here that is not mentioned in the book is that securing funding for anything that is in tech or perceived as being in tech, I don't really consider game development as being the tech industry. Yeah. Some people do. There's always going to be the flavor of the month thing that the investment class care about, and currently it's AI, and like 3 or 4 years ago it was metaverse and NFTs, and 10 years ago it was VR, and it's like
I guess it's sort of like interesting to sort of mention like when this book was written, because it's not that old, but it's before like the metaverse and AI and
it's like 3 years, isn't it? It's at the time of us recording this.
So I guess it probably would have been around like the time of the metaverse. But yeah, I think it talks more about venture capital and publishing and sort of the pros and cons of each of those. Like the sort of benefit other than, maintaining control of bootstrapping is if you do then want to go to a publisher, it sort of has shown that you've got skin in the game, and you're sort of like, and they sort of talk about it as the concept of like the the proven and the promise. Yeah,
I was just gonna, because that's jumping ahead a little bit in terms of the chronology of the book, but I think it's worth talking about now because I think it is one of the most universally useful things in the book for anyone, because it relates to, so the proven and the promise is Nordstrom talking about how you have to have aspirations, you have to have goals, and that is basically what you're promising to do. Like, we're going to become the best company in the world at this thing. And then the proven is like, what have you actually shown that you can do? And your success comes out of the link between those things, right? You don't go, we made a really successful movie, so now we're going to make Vampire Survivors, right? It's like, there has to be a relationship between those things. And in the book, it talks about that in relation to the venture capital of like, you can get money off people if you can show them that you've done something, right? Yeah. And if the extreme opposite end of that is like the guy on a Facebook group saying, "Hey guys, build my game for me for rev share," and that's why? So you can extrapolate the idea of the proven and the promise to like the largest company or the smallest operation, because it's ultimately down to people will buy into the thing you want to do if you've already proven you can do a percentage of it, The interesting historical example of that for me that's not in the book is Red Hook with Darkest Dungeon. When they did the Kickstarter for that, they hadn't built the game and it was just all animatics.
Really?
So, but that is a game that is so driven by the sort of art style. Yeah. And
did they have the narrator at that point?
I think they might have had the narrator for the trailer. And the thing is, their Kickstarter was like a comprehensive game design document. So it was very much like, okay, the animatic is showing us the art style, the mood of the game. It's showing us what things are going to look like in motion in the gameplay. Here's a very robust description of the game. And that was wildly overfunded because so much of what the game needed to prove was there in those documents and in that presentation and stuff like that. People have been burnt a lot by Kickstarter nowadays, so it's quite hard to do the like FTL, 12,000% funding thing or whatever it was. But you can extrapolate this to every level. It's like if you're a very small developer and you are looking for people to come and work with you and make art on your game, and you've got this itch page full of games you've actually completed, and maybe you've got like a rock, paper, shotgun article about one of them or something like that, more people are going to want to work with you because they can see you finish projects and you're not all talk. And, it's just kind of stands to reason. But I think it works the other way as well because, there are other things that can be proven, right? Like you could be reaching out to work with an artist, and you can see that they've already got like a little fandom for their characters and stuff, and so you say, hey, I've made the most generic tower defense game in the world. Can you please put all of your furries in it?
Yeah.
Like it can work both ways. But yeah, the section on the proven and the promise, we get how quickly can you prove what the thing is that you need to prove to like secure the thing. So to a funder, could be to people to sign off something in a studio.
Yeah. Could even just be to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's often what we're doing when we make small prototypes, right? But that's going to determine how easily people buy into the promise. Kind of obvious, but larger studios are more expensive to run, and that means needing to go faster to prove something.
Yeah.
Because the whole time you spend on it, you're burning money. This is why, right towards the end of the book, he talks about how mature companies, the percentage that they spend on innovation might be really tiny, like 5%. And they use Hearthstone as a case study in here, because Hearthstone was a very small team. I think they had engineers build them a prototype that was in Flash or something, and then they developed the core mechanics in that for like 2 years with like 5 people or something.
Yeah, it was like a core team of like 2, but
tiny. And that's like an example of how innovation can happen in a big company, but it is literally like this little laboratory somewhere with a couple of mad scientists in it, and they give an example from Paradox where a game was cancelled because it had too many firsts in it. This was Paradox trying to do an RPG instead of a strategy game. And several examples of devs extolling the idea of the 80-20 rule of like 80% proven stuff, 20% innovation, which again comes back to how I would apply the hedgehog principle as a small indie. It's like, what do I know I can do? What's the extra little bit that is an unknown? If I'm trying to make a game and put it out to market, I probably shouldn't make a game that is 100% stuff I don't know. I probably shouldn't make a VR language learning app about Sanskrit.
Yeah.
And
I guess by, a similar token, you shouldn't make something that's exactly like something that's already out there.
Yes. Yeah. There needs to be some innovation. I think sometimes people overestimate that, and I think when you tell people something needs to be unique or novel, they think you're telling them to reinvent the wheel. And it's like, no, this can be as simple as, make this exact game and make it mechanically almost identical and change the theme from, space to cowboys or something.
Yeah.
That can be enough. And then because it's going to appeal to a different set of people already. So yeah, we've had the hedgehog concept. There was a chapter on company architecture and management. There's a lot in there about ways of working. Your role as a studio lead isn't just to make a game, it's to make a studio that makes games. Honourable mention to Conway's Law. Do you know about Conway's Law? Conway's Law is the idea that a piece of software will always grow to resemble the shape of the team that made it. Right? So if you have like if you have an art department that's very disconnected and don't talk to the developers, you might end up with a game where the art doesn't feel integrated into the mechanics in a particular way, that type of thing. We've got a section called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is like the common mistakes, and it's really a repetition of stuff we've already talked about. Being too focused on the product and not on the company. We've got another example of the hedgehog concept in the Path of Exile team.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're talking about just then. They just made the best Diablo competitor.
Yeah, and this was like, I can't remember how long after Diablo 2 it came out. Did Path of the Exile 1 come out before 3 came out?
I can check.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember them talking about how, they all just really loved Diablo 2, and it might have been in response to Diablo 3.
Diablo 3 was 2012 and Path of Exile came out in 2013.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that was their... And I think we've spoken about this before, that, one of the best sort of motivations you can have in game design is to, like, try and make a game that you like but fix the things that you didn't like.
Yeah.
And that sounded like their plan.
Yeah, and they sort of recognise that lots of people had tried to make Diablo competitors and hadn't really delivered on it in certain ways. So they kind of, at that point, all you're competing with is the original thing. It's kind of like, we talked about this with Stardew Valley last time. It's just like, Stardew Valley's feature set is so similar to the SNES Harvest Moons. It's like 90% of the design is done for you. You just need to execute it really well and polish it, and then
lock yourself in a house for 5 years.
Lock yourself in a house for 5 years. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to kind of whiz over some of these points, but we get because I was initially one of the things about this podcast is we've got this kind of rotation in a spreadsheet of kind of subgenres, I would call them. And there's like developer stories, there's books that are specifically about game design, and then we've got like games and society and games as business. And I'm always a bit wary about the games as business ones because I feel like it's going to just conflict with everything I care about. But we get this whole conversation about the relationship between creativity and commerce, and like I already said, it already comes down pretty hard on the side of it's kind of like, once you've got the company, you should behave in quite a conservative way of like, this is what the company does and we don't deviate from it. But when you're establishing what the company is for in the first place, you should probably do the opposite of that, like, because that's how you become the market leader at something, is by going, okay, we're good at this, there's a gap in the market, and this is the way that we fill that gap in the market by doing what we're good at. So you are actually trying not to follow people, you're trying to do something unusual, creative, different from what everyone else would do. All of the things in that Lady Gaga meme where she's going, most of it. You're trying to do that, and then you kind of lock in and you go, this is what we do as a company, and then you try and just kind of like follow the North Star and keep. So he talks a lot about this relationship between creativity and commerce, and how they can feel like they're in conflict, but they're not necessarily. And most of the best teams are led by a pair with a grumpy old couple dynamic. So these are people that exist to, and they're not always going to be the same job roles. It might be the technical lead and the creative director. It might be the CTO and the CEO, whatever it is. But they exist to represent different ways of looking at the same interests, right? So, you know, the classic one is like the producer cares about not spending money and the game designer cares about doing more stuff. And then that kind of creates a feedback loop where the game designer has to really robustly justify what they want to do in the game, and the producer has to take on board the various things and then weigh up them in terms of like strategic goals and stuff like that. So did you have any thoughts on this stuff about this kind of dynamic?
Yeah, I did. Like, I'm sort of like skeptical that it needs to be a pair. I think what it's basically describing is like having healthy conflict in sort of the leadership of a company, and like it goes back to like the company culture thing of like, you know, if you've got like psychological safety, you can sort of have these, you know, robust conversations which, you know, from the outside might seem like, you know, quite hostile, but it's just people, you know, talking efficiently because they're not having to like, you know, couch everything in niceties and, you know, doing the shit sandwich compliment thing. And
oh yeah, it's the worst thing.
But yeah, that's like, I mean, I think that is like a healthy thing so long as like everyone's, you know, part of the kayfabe and sort of realizes that's what you're doing. Yeah,
I mean, I don't have it written down, but I think one of the examples he gives is actually a trio. There was a company with a trio. So it doesn't have to be two people, but yeah, that openness and that kind of productive friction. I remember Tim Kaine has a video where he talks about this, where I think people at one of the studios were complaining about him and another member of staff like shouting at each other. And it was just like, no, this is just we're just talking passionately about something that we disagree about, but we're not like that's very interesting, where you can have if you're not careful. Again, it's kind of going back to that quote with the guy from paradox where he was talking about like, I don't care what happens anywhere else. This is what needs to happen for the company to work well. And when people bring in their like outside ideas about like what's polite and all of this kind of stuff, you have to address those things very directly to get people comfortable with doing things the way that they need to be done in that kind of context. But yeah, I've definitely worked in places with like unilateral bully type people that just got very angry if you again, it's kind of going back to that Google study. If one person dominates all of the conversation, then it's probably a sign that the other people don't feel safe to talk about stuff.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, a lot of that sort of like bullying, you know, posturing that you can get in the workplace is like people not like seeing the sort of productive friction conversations and, you know, mimicking the style of it without really understanding the substance.
Well, can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I guess this goes back to, you know, past experiences I've had in large corporate structures where, you know, some people feel like in order to, you know, be a Steve Jobs, they need to, you know, have those aggro conversations with people without realizing that, you know, it kind of needs to be in aid of something, and, you know, both parties kind of need to understand what you're doing other than, you know, just yelling at someone for the sake of yelling at someone.
Yeah, so there's another book that I've been reading recently called Radical Candor by Kim
the
Scott.
Netflix one?
Is it the Netflix one?
I think that was
she spent a lot of time working at Google, but she's got this axis, which is like, it's like radical candor is when you have a high regard for others and a high regard for yourself.
Yeah.
So you're sort of telling people what's wrong in a way that's respectful for them. And then the sector you're talking about is called obnoxious aggression.
Yeah.
Which is when you have a high regard for yourself and a low regard for others. And then the opposite diagonally from that is ruinous empathy, when you have too much regard for others and not enough regard for yourself, so you don't tell people what's wrong or you skirt around the issue. And then the opposite from radical candor, which is negative in both directions, is manipulative insincerity, which is when you have a low regard in yourself and in others, which is kind of the same as being not passive aggressive, but passive defensive, or just straight passive. It's like everything's wrong in the world, but there's no point talking about it because everything will just, and like, if you see how people talk about like people that are quite junior or inexperienced, see how people talk about group projects and working with other people, that's usually where they are. It's like, oh, everyone's so, no one listens to me, and it's like, yeah, because like working with other people is hard work, and you get more out of it. It's like exponentially better to work with other people in terms of the end product, but you have to be willing to negotiate and navigate all of these things, whether you're working with 1,000 people or 10 people.
Yeah, I guess that's the most valuable part of this book, is sort of, you know, saying that doesn't just happen. You need to sort of lay out some groundwork and consciously, you know, work out how you're going to work with other people. Yeah,
and it kind of, it's sort of, like you say, the title, the subtitle, Why Some Game Companies Succeed While Others Fail, is a lot more appropriate than that more sort of prosaic title that they initially had, which was The Journey of a Successful Gaming Company. Not least because I think gaming company is a... I'm not going to get into that right now, but I just hate the term gaming when it's used in an industrial thing. But it is kind of the latter parts of this book are talking about the mature phase, when a company is just doing what it does and it's not growing anymore, but it's ticking over and it's fine. And then what happens when you go into the decline phase, when the KPIs start going down. What do you do in that situation? And it does have this kind of realist doom and gloom element of like, this can happen. And I don't think it's like super relevant to go into all of that, but it is... I'm sort of glad that it feels very balanced in terms of sort of presenting this more positive, here's what you should do, and then this kind of, but this can and will happen probably at some point.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably also worth mentioning that it isn't sort of presented as like a formula that, if you do these exact things, then you will definitely have a successful company. It's more looking at companies and seeing like, what are the common patterns and, both in terms of like their structure, their culture, and also like the phases that they go through.
Yeah. And people will go, survivorship bias, but people will always do that, and you can't fully de-risk any of these things. You can't de-risk business. You can't de-risk creative endeavor. If it was possible to have a formula that always succeeded, then the world would stop working.
Yeah.
Which is why all of these kind of hustle YouTubers that are like, here are 10 side hustles you can do, and they're all like, what is it, like, I don't know, like drop shipping or buying vegetables and replanting the seeds and stuff like this that are just like not scalable and stuff like that. There is no reliable formula for these things.
Yeah. But by that same token, you should like look at success and try and work out what you can learn from them if there are like commonalities and like, mitigate risk.
Yeah, exactly. And often, in these kind of stories, you've got people that have failed at some point, and that's kind of what distinguishes them from being a functional studio that can continue to do what it's doing versus like an indie startup where someone just pours 3 years into an unproven idea and then later on they're like, huh?
Yeah.
Why did that? It's like, well, did anyone playtest your game in those 3 years? No. Did you show concept art to anyone and go, hey, do you think this is cool? No. It's like, okay, well, there's your problem, right? And I think one of the things that really scares me, upsets me, I don't know the right term for it, depresses me more than anything, is sometimes you see like best practice. It doesn't have to be in a big team. It can be like a small indie studio that's doing okay with like 5 people. And you see all the things that they do to ensure that what they're doing is sensible and de-risked and validated. And you see that that's like a team of 5 people, right? Or 10 people. You look at a game like, I don't know. So to give a more concrete example, like recently I played Pacific Drive. Have you played Pacific Drive? So it's this kind of spooky car roguelike survival game. You drive around this haunted zone and you salvage stuff and you build your car, and it's like evoking all of the 90s car movies like Back to the Future and Ghostbusters, like every movie that had a sci-fi car in. It's like all of those mashed together. But they have so many clever constraints to make this game that looks kind of like a AAA game, but to make it manageable for a small team, which is like, there are no animated humans in, right? It does the classic walking simulator thing. No animated humans in. Very limited in terms of the things you can harvest because you're just harvesting scrap for your car. So you can't go and like chop down a tree and build a log cabin, even though that's like something people would expect from that genre of games.
Yeah.
So the theming of the game means that they can actually make less features than a big survival crafting game like Valheim or something, because you've got this expectation that, no, I just care about my car and my workshop. We're collecting scrap for that. There are so many little strategies that successful kind of high indie teams use to make their projects manageable so that they can then create something smaller where everything is high quality. And then you see like solo developers working on their own, and the scope of what they're trying to do is so much bigger than a Pacific Drive or a Dredge or even like a Hades or something like that. And you just think, like, I can't remember how this relates to the last point that we were talking about, but I find it really kind of upsetting that, it's that kind of thing of the proven and the promise again. Yeah. It's like, you're going to spend 3, 4, 5 years making the same thing, and at no point in that process are you going to do these de-risking things like showing it to people, showing people some concept art, telling people about the idea before you commit to making it. Taking these scoping constraints and making your game easier to make by saying, that big RPG we're going to make, now it's just an RPG about being a wizard. You can't be a barbarian or whatever. Like, all of these kind of clever things you can do to make sure you're not wasting your time. Companies do that when they've got 100 people or when they've got 10 people. But often when we're like working on our own, we don't do any of that. And it's like, it's like watching someone punch themselves in the face sometimes, I think.
Yeah, and like it can sort of like change depending on how you're building it. Like if it's something that you're building, you know, in your spare time after work, like you don't have a budget. Like, I mean, you do when you really think about it, because that's, you know, time you're investing that, you know, you're not spending with your family or sleeping or any of those things. But, you know, if there isn't like a point where you're going to run out of money, then you're not necessarily thinking of like, okay, what's the absolute like smallest thing I can do
like
with
the critical path type stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I do think books like this can be helpful even for someone that is working entirely on their own, because it does help to pivot you to this way of thinking of like, can I step outside of myself and treat myself as an employee?
Yeah,
You know, because if this, even if your kind of initial goal is just to make a game on your own, if that game is successful, then presumably you would want to do bigger and better things in future, and you've now made yourself the de facto game director for this game. So when you make the second one and you've got 5 people, you're going to end up in this territory anyway.
Yeah.
Kind of like you said at the beginning about motivations for reading this. So yeah, did you have any kind of closing thoughts about this, or anything we haven't been over in your notes? That I feel like we've touched on a lot of the main stuff, and I think if people are interested in the big company stuff in this book, they should go and read it. But I also suspect there aren't many people matching that description that listen to this podcast.
No, I think that sort of like covers everything that I thought was like useful for it. And like, again, I sort of picked it up on a whim because it was, you know, tangentially related to, you know, things that I'd been reading. And it ended up having like much more useful stuff in it than I had initially imagined, mostly because, you know, it's talking like lots of really big studios, and, you know, I'm just a small bean. But yeah, like you sort of very succinctly summed up there, like there are lots of things that you can apply to yourself on a much smaller scale. Yeah.
So I had a couple of very small criticisms, because I mean it is a hyper-capitalist book, and what I mean by that is it is very invested in the idea that the point of a company is to grow and grow and grow and become as big as it possibly can, right? And that means that the book itself doesn't really entertain the idea that it's okay to just make a one-hit wonder game and then live comfortably, which I think in our circles, we know loads of people like that. I mean, like, you can pick any game that has been a sort of forever in early access game, like a Dwarf Fortress or, you know, Caves of Crud or something, and be like, okay, that's not what this book is interested in talking about. And that's okay, as long as you understand coming to the book that that's basically excluded. Like a Team Cherry is outside the purview of this book, because it's just like you make your 2 little games and then you make another one when you want to. That's not what this book is about. Making a game studio, like a machine that makes games. This machine eats crunch and turns it into. So yeah, it's aimed at people that are thinking of making games as a startup, as a business. That does somewhat lower the relevance of the book for a solo indie developer, but I think it's still helpful stuff to think through. We get some quotes from Peter Thiel.
Yep.
You know, notorious hater of Greta Thunberg and spreader of wacky conspiracy theories.
Yes, possibly the Antichrist. Hasn't given us a straight answer on that.
Yeah, so Peter Thiel used to be a relatively normal business guy, if there is such a thing. But in the last year, or how long has this been going on for? They're basically giving speeches about how Greta Thunberg is the Antichrist, and also anyone who doesn't want AI is also an Antichrist. I think he's got quite a flexible idea of who and what the Antichrist is, and there might be multiple Antichrists.
Yeah, I think he's had like some sort of weird sort of dark politics for a while now.
Yeah.
All that like Mencius Smallbug, like...
It's any of these guys that have $1 billion.
Yeah.
Like Billie Eilish was coming for them the other day. They're not going to lie. Billie Eilish will be the Antichrist next. So yeah, I just found that very funny to like... The Peter Thiel quote came quite late in the book for me, and I've been so on board with the book so far because it did such an elegant handling of like the conflict between commerce and creativity that I was like pleasantly surprised to have this very LinkedIn business bro looking book to actually care about, you know, trying to be innovative, trying to do unusual things, and be so kind of on the creative side of things. And then I got like 4/5 of the way through, and there was a quote from Peter Thiel, and I was like, okay, this is who this is for, is it? Yeah, I think for small developers, the most helpful bits from this were the hedgehog concept, the proven and the promise. But loads of the stuff in here is still applicable if you're like a small developer. I think a lot of it depends on your career stage, because lots of people don't like to admit it, but they are basically still in an early learning stage and aren't really at the stage where they can sit down with themselves and do a skills audit and go, right, what's my career look like from here on? So that is the problem with doing sort of populist content creation on podcasts and YouTube and stuff, is everyone wants everything to be directly relevant to them at exactly that moment in time, and it's not always, you know. And like I said earlier, I think this is a very refreshing pushback against the kind of game dev meta where every discussion is about the magical formula for success and following what's hot right now and stuff.
And I think, you know, even as like an indie dev, you know, making like games for like art's sake, like, you know, big game studios and the games industry is still a part of that. And, you know, a lot of people that go on to make those games cut their teeth in, you know, regular capitalist studios, and like sort of, you know, understanding the whole ecosystem, I think is valuable. And there's things you can take from it, and there's things you can actively reject from that. And just the more you know.
Yeah, exactly. And like, okay, so thanks, Tom.
No, thank you.
We're reading something very different next week. Next month. We're doing Scott McCloud. Understanding Comics, the Invisible Art. Now, I understand he wrote another Understanding Comics after this, but it's longer and it's not as focused on the stuff that I think we should read about. Have you ever read Scott McCloud?
No. Does that have pictures in it?
It's a comic about comics.
Okay, that's good. But
it's not a comic about how to make comics. A lot of it is about how comics do particular things with visual communication, which is why I thought we should read it. Because I know, Unreal developers, cover your ears now. But I, and perhaps Tom, are firmly in the camp of people that understand that video games are basically just interactive cartoons.
Yeah.
They're not simulations. Their goal is not to be super real and to have fully destructible terrain. Sometimes that can be fun. But the vast majority of indie developers are working in a context where their games are basically interactive cartoons. And I think this book has some helpful stuff to say on that. And if you are the kind of person that is making your own game and doesn't think of themselves as being a very competent visual artist, I think understanding some of this theory stuff about, you know, a lot of it is about what our brain does when we look at a little set of dots and mouth and make a face out of it, you know. I spent ages doing that with my current game, just like I've got 8 pixels to work with on the face, and I'm just moving these things around. Like, how does it feel now? Because the classic Adventure Time face, where the mouth is very close up in between the eyes, and it makes them look very cute. So we're going to do that, and then after that we'll work out the next couple of months. And yeah, if you are already part of the Indie Game Clinic Discord, there is a open spreadsheet where you can suggest books for future, and we will do them in some sort of order that tries to rotate through different topics, so we don't do 2 months worth of pure design books or 2 months worth of business books in a row, and we'll do them when we get to them. And some of it might come down to like which books have been covered on a recent podcast. So someone asked if we were going to read Flow by Csikszentmihalyi recently, and I know that Game Studies Study Buddies already has a very good episode on that, so I don't really want to double up on that. So yeah.
Cool.
Looking forward to reading some comics next month.
Love comics.
Comics about comics. Yeah, thank you all for listening, and see you soon.
Bye.
The